Episode 3, A Quiet Place, Day 1, Belated Review. So I didn't go to the theater to watch this movie. We rented it, and I'm so glad we didn't, because this movie, while it wasn't the most awful movie ever, certainly wasn't the greatest either, and definitely is the weakest installment in the franchise. First, let's talk about the plot. We're following a terminally ill woman named Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o. We start off with her and the other members of her hospice on a field trip, on which she only agrees to go under the condition that she can go get pizza at a place called Patsy's. While out on their little excursion, the people of New York City witness firsthand the invasion of the aliens. Sam continues her mission for pizza in the midst of this horrific event with her pet cat Frodo and a chance encounter with a law student named Eric. Here are my gripes with the movie. First of all, what was the point of this movie even being made? We already had a Day 1-esque experience in A Quiet Place 2. It was only the first 10 minutes of the movie, but it still showed the alien invasion, and we saw it from the perspective of a family we actually recognized. Someone needs to tell Hollywood that not every successful movie deserves an entire trilogy. Even the first movie is riddled with tropes. Angsty teen who ruins everything trying to prove herself, who ends up proving herself by the end of the movie. Pregnant woman who goes into labor at the worst time. Father who is the thorn in the angsty teen's side, sacrifices himself, and this act shows the angsty teen that she really is loved. Father who tries to protect his children from the horrors of the outside world ends up accidentally exposing them to the horrors of the outside world. I mean, the list goes on and on. But my point is that the first movie isn't as solid and groundbreaking as some people have been saying over the years, in my opinion. And this has led to a franchise that had the potential to be great, but is instead declining in quality. Second of all, following a character that is already on the brink of death and jokes about it constantly takes some of the edge off of the suspense that is needed in order to feel like the main character is in any danger. Having someone who is so brave and valiant, yet so flippant when it comes to common sense and self-preservation, is also a consistent side plot in the Quiet Place franchise, and it's annoying every time. The first two movies show Reagan to have this personality trait, and now we have to watch Sam duck and dodge through these creatures while holding onto an animal and protecting a man with severe anxiety, just so she can relive some memories she shared with her father before she dies. Which leads me to my next point. The plot I read to you all is not an over-exaggerated summary. That is the main mission, which is driving the story for 95% of the movie. Pizza. Memories. Some people might like a sentimental story like that, but me personally, I need a little bit more meat and potatoes on the plate this movie calls a dish. It's weak. It's flimsy. Maybe it could have been a side quest, something that Sam could have stopped to see one last time before getting on the boats that the military was guiding survivors to. I don't know. But to have it as the main quest was a huge mistake on their part, because now we're stuck with such a trivial reason to connect with characters we've never seen before. And we need that emotional connection to the main characters so that we can care about them. My next point is that scenes that could have been so much more intense just became boring from one simple thing: cutting the ambiance out of the movie. There are a few scenes where the characters need to be stealthy, and somewhere in the editing process, the team or director that made this movie decided to cut the audio completely so you can't hear anything. Maybe I've been spoiled by indie horror games like PT or From the Darkness, but what I'm used to is the horror of being able to hear nothing except the sound of your beating heart, the dripping of a leaky faucet, and the echoes of your footsteps as you walk slowly through an area where you think you're alone, but also feel like you're being watched. That level of intensity was missed in this movie. Every time Sam traveled somewhere, trying to be as quiet as possible because she either just outran some aliens or didn't know where they were, the sound was cut out completely. Once again, this concept worked better in the second movie, where you followed Reagan and listened to her perspective. For the most part, she can't hear anything, but she can feel the vibrations of cars being flipped and buildings crumbling, along with a constant ringing in her ears. All of these sounds were kept in those movies, and it has to be noted that this effect didn't last that long, and we were eventually brought back to what it would sound like to people that weren't deaf. And during the scenes where characters have to stealth their way through an area, you could hear them breathe, you could hear leaves crunch under their feet, and you could hear the wind rustle through the trees. This ambiance makes the viewer feel as if they have to hold their breath as well, because you can actually hear how hard the characters were trying to stay silent, and making noise yourself would break the immersion of your viewing experience. Unfortunately, you don't get that same suspense in this film. Also, what was going on with the cat? My mom and I were watching it, and during the scene where Eric sees Frodo for the first time and leads him to Sam, my mom said, "Is this cat human?" I thought it was hilarious, but it's actually a good question to ask. Frodo really wasn't acting like a normal cat. It looked like he had no sense of danger, which for a cat is so unnatural it's not even funny. I mean, it was so bad that there was a challenge that recently started on social media where people are holding their cats and saying, "Here's me seeing if my cat and I will survive a quiet place." I mean, he never had a negative reaction to any of the aliens if they were nearby, and that honestly is my biggest complaint about this animal. He never arched his back and hissed. We never saw the hairs on his back stand up, nothing. Just calm, collected, almost like a guardian. Which would be an interesting concept in a fantasy setting, but not here. Of course, if Frodo would have acted like a normal cat, he would have died before half of the movie was over. But if you're not going to allow a realistic portrayal of an animal in as serious a movie as this one, then why bother writing it? Especially if you're going to go through the trouble of casting two different cats to play the same one. So now that I've explained all of my main problems with the movie, I'll end the video on a high note and talk about the things I actually enjoyed about the film. I absolutely loved, I actually fell in love and wanted to marry Eric's character. He was such a beautiful soul and a real believable character in such a terrifying predicament. I think the actor that played him, Joseph Quinn, did a phenomenal job with portraying such a wide range of emotions. The fear of just telling Sam his name, even though it was raining. The sympathy that it took to perform a magic act at the club in Harlem for Sam. The anger and frustration in the yell he released under the thunderstorm. I think this might have been my first time seeing Joseph Quinn's work, and I was impressed. And of course, we can't forget about Lupita's portrayal of Sam. Lupita was also not pulling any punches in this role, and her almost pessimistic, well, not even almost, her pessimistic outlook on her own life was palpable. I at least felt for her character, and I believed Sam as she struggled between leaving Eric behind and fighting for him. And as much as I disliked watching Sam jump through hoops, and I mean all the hoops, for pizza, once you realize her reasoning behind every move she made, I genuinely felt sorry for her. By the end of the movie, her mean-spirited character redeemed herself, and it made me happy to see Sam find contentment, even if it did mean she decided to kill herself by unplugging her earbuds from her iPod and allowing the aliens to find her. That's my review of A Quiet Place Day 1. Before the movie started, I noticed that the IMDb rating for it was 6 out of 10. I think that's fair, but personally I would give it a 5 out of 10. Once again, not the worst movie ever. If someone was playing it at their house for a slumber party or movie night, I'd sit down and watch it, after a sigh here and an eye roll there. But it was definitely not good enough, and not strong enough to warrant its own existence. Thank you for listening to the Locked Dungeon Podcast. Good night.